along you can. 20 years after the Greensboro Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued its final report, former commissioners, staff, and community members who have carried forward its recommendations reflect on what it took to move from truth-telling to lasting change. This panel explores how the commission was intentionally designed for success through its mandate and selection process, while also confronting significant political, institutional, and community challenges along the way. Panelists will share candid lessons learned about building legitimacy, sustaining momentum, and translating recommendations into action, offering practical insights for those shaping a future North Carolina statewide Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Please give one more round of applause for our panelists.
May God provide this commission with the will, the insight, the vision, the sensitivity, and caring to be that catalyst for truth, healing, and restorative justice in this community. What a blessed day.
On June 12, 2004, over 500 people gathered in Greensboro, North Carolina to witness the swearing in of the first Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the United States.
It is with great confidence in the people of Greensboro and in this citizen-led process that I charge you as Truth and Reconciliation Commissioners to carry out your work with honor, for much of the quality of the work you do will shape the quality of life in our city and beyond for years to come. God bless you.
I really did not fully appreciate the magnitude of the endeavor until I was standing in the room with all the people who came for the swearing in, and as I heard different representatives from the community in Greensboro talked about their hopes and their desires for us and for the truth and for reconciliation.
The installation of this commission was the culmination of nearly 5 years of work and planning by a group called the Greensboro Truth and Community Reconciliation Project. Initiated by survivors of a violent episode in Greensboro's past, guided by a National Advisory Board and the International Center for Transitional Justice, and propelled by the participation of a cross-section of Greensboro citizens called the Local Task Force, the project had crafted a selection process and a mandate for a commission independent of any external influence to examine the context, causes, sequence, and consequence of the events of November 3, 1979, and to issue a report to the Greensboro community.
When I first heard about the commission, I was excited about its potential for helping our community identify and heal some of the divisions that exist. And I realize a lot of folks in different parts of our community are not aware of those divisions or choose to believe they don't exist. But in my work dealing with racism and diversity and cultural conflict, I see every day evidence of those divisions.
The telling of the city's proud history. The Greensboro Project is drawing inspiration and guidance from a number of truth and reconciliation processes around the world, the best known of which is South Africa.
You are going to be a crippled community, whether you like it or not. You are going to be a crippled community as long as you refuse to face up to your past.
A press conference and open house on January 25, 2005, marked the beginning of the public phase of the Commission's work. The Commission and its staff set up an office in downtown Greensboro, took statements from individuals, facilitated conversations with relevant stakeholders, held and participated in community events, conducted a door-to-door campaign, met with representatives from other Truth Commissions, including Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and launched a website, TV show, blog, and weekly newsletter. Even as the Commission set about its tasks, the need for its existence and integrity of its independence was the subject of ongoing debate in the media, the community, and at City Hall.
Motion to oppose the Truth and Reconciliation program.
Okay.
To not endorse, I guess.
To oppose.
To oppose.
And that passes 6-3.
We will now bring this hearing to order. We thank everyone here for their willingness and openness to listen to the variety of viewpoints on traumatic events in our history.
Over the course of 3 public hearings held in Greensboro, 54 people spoke to the Commission about the events of November 3rd, their origins, and lasting impact.
The reason I came to Greensboro, they put the poster out, death to the Klan. Said we was hiding under rocks, we were scum. I'm not scum, I'm as good as any man walks on this earth.
Gunfire, screams. Gunfire, screams. Engines gunning as the shooters fled. An eerie silence. I could smell gunpowder in the air and heard the groaning of people who were dying.
You don't let 2 groups with extreme political views from each other come together without a buffer. And the buffer would have been the police. In my opinion, yes, we should have been there.
As soon as the shooting stopped and I realized that people were injured, I searched for Caesar and I found him dead. And I immediately knew that we had been set up.
After November the 3rd, the police treated us like we had committed the crimes, like we had killed the communist workers on November the 3rd. We were put on curfew. There were helicopters. There was tons of police. We were in a war zone. We were treated like prisoners in our own community.
My 2 children saw their Auntie Sandy with a bullet between her eyes and blood streaming down her face. This scene was permanently burned into the consciousness of my little girls. And when I hear establishment apologists with glib arrogance promote the absolutely false view that I planned a shootout and then trick the police, my blood boils as my soul rages.
You know, there are many people whose lives changed that day, changed to not trust in the system that's supposed to protect you. It's changed to, you know, a fear of many things, but my life never changed. It started that way.
After 26 years, there are people who were still afraid of retaliation for speaking at the public hearings. How intimidating, how shocking when you get right down to it. I was extremely proud of the people who did consent to speak in presenting such different views, which is what we needed, you know, and without that, we wouldn't have had the balance that we're able to come up with.
Nearly 2 years after taking their oaths, the 7 members of the Greensboro Truth and Reconciliation Commission present their final report with findings and recommendations for the city.
On the morning of November 3rd, 1979, Klan and Nazi members headed for the parade starting point, intending to break the law, and came with an arsenal of weapons and heavy firearms. The heaviest burden of responsibility is on Klansmen and Nazis, who who, after an initial stick fight with demonstrators, returned to their cars, retrieved weapons, and fired at mostly unarmed demonstrators. When the caravan's path of exit was cleared and they could have fled. We find that the Communist Workers' Party members did not seek or deserve to be killed. They did, however, underestimate the danger of taunting the Klan with provocative language and for beating on caravan cars with sticks. The primary contributor to the loss of life was the absence of police, which endangered the welfare of all involved, including residents of Morningside homes where the shootings took place. Nearly all commissioners believe that the police absence was the result of some intentionality on the part of at least some officers in the Greensboro Police Department. Paid police informant and Greensboro Klansman Eddie Dawson played a leadership role in bringing the Klan and Nazis into contact with the Communist Workers' Party. Despite knowledge of Dawson's actions and other intelligence that violence was likely, police made decisions to give Dawson a copy of the parade permit, not to warn demonstrators about the supremacist plans, not to be anywhere near the scene, not to accompany the caravan in a noticeable way, not to monitor the situation using hand radios, and not to stop fleeing cars after the tragedy. City officials endeavored to protect the city's image by attempting to distance Greensboro from the underlying issues that contributed to the event. The city's elected officials and managers responded to the tragedy by clamping down on citizen protests in the interest of security through tactics such as curfews, National Guard presence, public service announcements, obstruction surveillance, and intimidation of subsequent protests. The verdicts in the three trials conflicted with what seems to be a common sense assessment of wrongdoing based on the videotape, resulting in a greater distrust of the justice system. A flawed system of jury selection created all-white juries unrepresentative of the community, contributing to the acquittals. We found that the events of November 3rd, 1979 are woven through with issues of race and class. Our report discusses underlying issues including racial and economic justice, white supremacy, and the failure of the police and justice system to provide equal protection to all residents.
We've worked together for 2 years and did the public hearings, and now we have a report which is several hundreds of pages, but I still see it only as a part of the work, in fact a small part of the work, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done by the community, starting with putting the effort to understand what really happened and to look at our findings and to look at our recommendations, agree, disagree, question, critique, do everything that a healthy, critical community would do, but get engaged.
My greatest hope is that the west side of Greensboro and the east side of Greensboro would come together and at least talk like we had to do as commissioners, because that's what happened at that table. Different parts of this city came together. We had struggles, but we still respect each other.
That's the lesson, I think, to draw from this. It's not just about 7 people who struggled through over a 2-year period. We are a part of a process that involves a lot of people. And that is what it's going to take to be able to try to make real the recommendations that we're putting forward in this report.
I believe we've learned a lot from the past. And I'm hopeful that we can change the future for the better.
No one is ever going to be able to heal every wound, nor will any commission anywhere be able to bring complete reconciliation. But every step toward healing and every step toward reconciliation makes each community and the nation as a whole that much stronger and that much better. I'm very proud of what we've accomplished, and I'm thankful that a lot of communities around the U.S. are looking at us for leadership as a model to follow.
Let's try that again. Good afternoon. My name's Pat Clark, and I am one of the 7 commissioners for the Greensboro Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's hard for me to believe that it's been 20 years, so there's a lot of time that's gone by, yet as many people have already mentioned throughout the yesterday and today, the timing of remembering is really important as we look at I was chosen, I'm not sure why I was really chosen as a commissioner because I wasn't around for the selection process. Jill will talk a little bit about the selection process, but I will say this, that prior to being chosen, I had worked with the Southern Poverty Law Center, and I was the director of their Klan Watch project. So I monitored the activities of the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazis. I also was a part of a group called Murder Victims' Families for Reconciliation, having had 2 family members murdered myself. This is a collection of folks who were opposed to the death penalty in spite of having family members who were lost to murder. And also worked with a group called Fellowship of Reconciliation. So I think the emphasis on monitoring white supremacists and focusing on reconciliation probably has something to do with my selection. Needless to say, it was really a very important time and an important process. What I'd like to do is just kind of reiterate why the commission was established in the first place, and then to just go over what the mandate was, because the mandate really was kind of our blueprint for how to engage the work on an ongoing basis. As you noted, as was noted in the video, the Greensboro Truth and Reconciliation Commission was tasked with examining the context, the causes, the sequence, and the consequences, and to make recommendations for community healing around the tragedy in Greensboro, North Carolina on November 3rd, 1979. And I just want to lift up the names of those who were murdered and those who were injured, because that's also part of the storytelling that needs to happen, is continuing to bring those people back into our presence. So those who were killed were Cesar Cauze, Michael Ronald Nathan, William Sampson, and Sandy Smith, and James Waller. Also, those who were wounded were Paul Bermazon, Claire Butler, Tom Clark, Nelson Johnson, Rand Manzella, Don Pellis, Frankie Powell, Jim Wren, and also Klansman Harold Flowers and news photographer David Dalton. I think it's really important for us to remember that November 3rd was not an isolated incident. There were protests that had been happening all over the state for quite a long time around justice issues. And so November 3rd, the killing of folks and the wounding of folks was an incident that was in response to a lot of great activism that was happening. And it's really important to remember that because of November 3rd, it actually quelled some of the activism as people were really fearful for their lives going forward. As I said, the mandate was absolutely critical to the work of the commission. And I'm going to read it, and so that you can fully appreciate what it was we were tasked to do. The mandate says, there comes a time in the life of every community when it must look humbly and seriously into its past in order to provide the best possible foundation for moving into a future based on healing and hope. Many residents of Greensboro believe that for this city, the time is now. In light of the shooting of 5 people and the wounding of 10 others in Greensboro, North Carolina on November 3rd, 1979, and in light of the subsequent acquittal of defendants in both state and federal criminal trials, despite the fact that the shootings are videotaped and widely viewed, and in light of the further investigations, passage of time, and other factors which allowed a jury in a later civil trial to find certain parties liable for damages in the death of only one of the victims, and in light of the confusion, pain, and fear experienced by residents of the city and the damage to the fabric of relationships in the community caused by these incidents and their aftermath, the Greensboro Truth and Community Reconciliation Project, including the signers of its declarations, calls for the examination of the context, causes, sequence, and consequences of the events of November 3rd, 1979. We affirm that the intention of this examination shall be healing and reconciliation of the community through discovering and disseminating the truth of what happened and its consequences in the lives of individuals and institutions, both locally and beyond Greensboro, clarifying the confusion and reconciling the fragmentation that has been caused by these events and their aftermath, in part by educating the public through its findings, acknowledging and recognizing people's feelings, including feelings of loss, guilt, shame, anger, and fear, helping facilitate changes in social consciousness and in the institutions that were consciously or unconsciously complicit in these events, thus aiding in the prevention of similar events in the future. And most importantly, this examination is not for the purpose of exacting revenge or recrimination. Indeed, the Commission will have no such power. Rather, the Commission will attempt to learn how persons and groups came to directly or indirectly involved in these events. It will assess the impact of these events on the life and development of this community. It will seek all possibilities for healing and transformation.
Thank you, Pat. Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Jill Williams, and I was the Executive Director of the Greensboro Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And if it seems like we're in the weeds on this, it's because that's what Miss Bridget Raspberry asked us to do. Just to give a little bit more detail about what a Truth Commission does, and in particular what the Greensboro Truth Commission did. You'll notice that I'm saying Truth Commission and not Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Our title was definitely the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but the work that we did was really focused on the truth. Our job, their job, and I staffed them. We had 3 other full-time staff members and several other part-time staff members and volunteers that helped us do the work. We were so busy working on the research and writing this report and planning several events that we really, when we got down to the work, we hoped that the work we did led to some form of reconciliation, but there's a lot of work that we have to do to define what we mean by reconciliation. So what we're going to talk about primarily today is the truth-seeking work that we did. We can talk about reconciliation, and maybe we all have different definitions of that ourselves. But so let me move on to this. But I do want to actually go back just one second. Sorry. I'm going to ask for a little bit of audience participation from Greensboro folks here. I want to point out, everybody's talked about how long this process takes, and I don't want to damage any hopes or anything or be a downer, but I do want to point out, who can tell me, I always go to Mr. Brandon, but maybe somebody else can help too, when did the 1,000 conversations take place? I think that was in the 90s sometime. 1999. And the government certification here, the City of Greensboro certifying the community truth through a public apology. What was that, 2020?
Probably somewhere right around there, I would think.
Okay, okay, and Paula Washington up here saying 2020. So that is, somebody better at math than me, that's what, 31 years? Okay, so 31 years. And how about, when was because we really should have on here Greensboro Requiem, and when that was first performed at UNCG. Who? Our acting professor isn't here anymore. Who can tell me what? That was also 99, so that coincided with the Night of 1,000 Conversations. Okay, so that's 31 years here in Greensboro. So I just think it's important to reality check and to think about. I would say the time clock on the statewide TRC has already started. It started well with the first, maybe before, but with the very first summit that we had here maybe 4 years ago, something. This is the 2022. So, okay, let me move on. You can flip the slide now. We're really here to talk about beyond the mandate, but I do think it's really important to talk about the value of the selection process here in Greensboro. I wasn't involved in that happened before I got here, so there is nothing braggadocious about me saying that I think this was brilliant. You can see here that the 17 different groups were invited here in Greensboro to appoint someone to this selection panel that eventually selected the 7 commissioners. I don't know how well you can see from this list. The ones that are sort of grayed out are there were only 3 groups that declined to appoint someone to the selection panel. The goal was the hope was that all residents of Greensboro would see themselves, could feel represented by at least one of these groups. I don't know if you can see it from where you're sitting. I don't want to read all of them, but the groups who were invited were chairs of the student bodies from all 5 local colleges and universities, the Chamber of Commerce. Here I am reading it. I'm sorry. But it was the Guilford County Democratic Party, the Guilford County Republican Party, the NAACP, the Jewish community, Muslim community, NCCJ, the Pulpit Forum, Triad City Labor Council, there's more. But they even tried to figure out obviously they didn't want to invite overt white supremacy groups, but they invited the Sons of Confederate Veterans and the Daughters of the Confederacy to appoint someone to this selection panel. I do have some of you might have heard my story about this. They did not appoint someone to the selection panel, but I ran into, right after the report was released, I went to Chick-fil-A. It was before it was bad. I knew it was bad to go to Chick-fil-A. And I was the only person in there. It was actually the morning after we released the report, and I went down early to get the News and Record. I wish I hadn't, because it wasn't a good story that they did about it. But, and this man walked in. Nobody else was in the restaurant except the people working there, and this man came in, and he had on Confederate everything, hat, shirt, belt buckle, everything. And he came down and wanted to sit with me. So I said, okay, and I had the paper. He said, you know, I was invited to sit on that selection panel. So he was the president or whatever of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. I said, well, why didn't you? He said, well, I'm in the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and we don't get along with the Daughters of the Confederacy, so we couldn't agree on a joint person to appoint. I don't know if that story's true. I mean, I believe, but it was a really good story as to why they didn't appoint someone. So another story about the selection process is that the mayor of Greensboro, who, as you saw in the film, voted to oppose truth and reconciliation. They didn't just, as you saw, they didn't just not endorse the truth and reconciliation process. They voted to oppose truth and reconciliation, but he did appoint someone to the selection panel. He appointed a man named Judge Lawrence McSwain, and Judge Lawrence McSwain ended up chairing the selection panel, which really lent, the whole process actually lent legitimacy to the whole process, even though it was not a government-endorsed process. And some would argue, and I would be one of those, I think because it wasn't endorsed by the city. Some people said if it had been endorsed by the city, that would have been the city investigating itself. Maybe a lot of people wouldn't have seen it as a legitimate process. So this was a small d democratic process. that I continue to think this selection process. So my advice to those of you who are going to be designing, I'm not saying it shouldn't be an official statewide process. If that's where it ends up going, it's fine. But if it's not, I think some kind of or even if it is, some kind of a democratic process where it's even more important with it being statewide to think about how to make that be representative, as many people as possible seeing themselves in this selection process in that period is really important. So I'll pass it back to you, Pat.
So I want to talk a little bit about the commission itself. I think it's fair to say that we had the mandate and not a whole lot more than that. There were some funds that the beloved Community Center and the Greensboro Community Project had raised, and then we didn't fully appreciate that part of our work was going to be hiring an executive director for the commission, and that part of the work would be some additional fundraising and so forth. I want to say that I think we were very fortunate in hiring Jill Williams as our executive director, and I didn't realize this until we were talking last night, and I was just so buoyed yesterday by all the youth participating in the mock trial and the youth today, but Jill was 24 when she became the executive director of the Greensboro Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So just another shout out to the beauty of incorporating young people into the work. So we had 7 people. I was the only person outside of North Carolina who was a part of the commission. At the time I was living in New York. And I think we had 1 person from Durham, and the rest were from Greensboro. So it was really very representative of Greensboro. We had 3 African Americans, 1 Asian woman, and 3 white commissioners. And it's really funny because Jill just talked about not really kind of thinking about reconciliation as part of the process. But the reality is when we started the work, there were a few commissioners who went directly to reconciliation. Let's talk about reconciliation. Like, wait a minute, didn't we miss some steps here? And that was one of the first tensions. It's like, where do we begin this work? And not only were there some steps initially kind of skipped, but we had such different lived experiences that we were bringing into the room. And as you might imagine, that created quite a bit of tension in and of itself. I would say that the commission was a little bit like a microcosm of Greensboro, a little bit of everything, and that's both the reason why I think ultimately it had integrity and it worked, but it also made the work very challenging. It was so challenging that at one point we just had to stop. We were just not getting along. We weren't having the same, having conversations that were moving. I don't know if I've ever told anybody this, but the commissioners of color would go out after the commission meetings and say, "Can you believe that?" You know? So we had those moments where we had to kind of like debrief from our process. And then we just realized that we couldn't move forward unless we had someone come in and help us actually talk about racism itself and how we experience racism and how what we needed to do to be able to have honest, authentic conversations. So that was a really huge part of it. We had an excellent staff with Jill, and we had a person, Joya, who worked on communications, Emily, who did a lot of the research. We had lots and lots of volunteers from Greensboro. We had lots and lots of volunteers from the colleges, both at the faculty level and from students. And so in that way, we were very much supported. And one of the things that I think was really interesting to me is that the commission was seated about 25 years after November 3rd, 1979. But depending on what circles you moved in, people either didn't know anything about November 3rd, 1979, or it was still like an open wound. And one of the things that I found really interesting was that a lot of the college students were writing their thesis or doing art projects on what happened on November 3rd, 1979. So as much as the city powers that be had tried to make it seem as if that was something that happened in the past and we had moved on, it was really obvious that people had not moved on because it had not been resolved. When we had those moments where we weren't quite sure how to move forward, we had the benefit of being able to look back at the mandate that told us, you know, what it was we were supposed to do. And I think in any effort like this, and I think both Jill and I have had experiences with other US-based commissions that have been so broad and so expansive that they just kind of went off the rails. But because we had a very focused mandate and a focused period of time, and we had all those different people that I mentioned who were supporting the commission in various ways, I think we were able to kind of move through the process. We had lots of research that was done, not only by the person who was leading the research, but again by a number of people from throughout the community who provided their skills and contributions. We also had door-to-door campaigns, we had public hearings, and I think Jill and her young staff came up with lots of other creative ways to get the word out, whether it was TV shows or blogs or radio presentations, because a big part of it was just to educate people about what the intention of the Greensboro Truth and Reconciliation process was. We, early on with the commission, we made a commitment to stay at the table. I think we kind of demanded of each other that we would stay at the table. And I think making that commitment early on was absolutely critical because we had to call upon it at different times when people got frustrated or felt like they weren't being heard or felt like something wasn't going their way. We could call back or draw back on the fact that we had made a commitment to stay at the table. There are many, many things that we learned from the commission process. There are many poignant moments. But one of the things that I think I was totally unprepared for was during one of the public hearings where we had the children of survivors or children of folks who had been part of the march, the protests, testify. And some of these children were named after those who were killed. And one of the things that they talked about was the burden of being responsible for the legacy of these icons. And that just strikes me as a really important lesson because I looked at some of the parents in the audience and it was news to them how heavy a burden their children were experiencing. And you saw one person talked about like her life basically began with November 3rd, 1979. And as we learn more and more about intergenerational trauma, I think it really kind of makes me realize that that's something that we have to be very, very aware of and very conscious of and really work on also. So we spent 2.5 years. Initially, we were given a 2-year time period to do the commission. Felt like we couldn't complete the work in that amount of time. We were given another 6 months to complete the work. And this also is really interesting because there is no government involvement, no government mandate, that we've made up the rules as we went along, but we also tried to hold firm to what we said we were going to do. And so even though there wasn't a reason why we couldn't take longer than 2 years, we wanted to make sure we got permission to do another 6 months. The reality is we could have gone on a lot longer because there was so much information to go through and so much to analyze and so forth. But it was really important for us to be able to deliver to the community of Greensboro something that would provide a foundation for how to move forward. And as I started, I just want to reiterate, early on we realized that we could unpack the information, we could try to put together the truth to the best of our ability, but ultimately these were only tools for the community of Greensboro to use as it looked at how to heal and how to provide reconciliation.
I would just add to that even though we were operating 25 years after the event, the Greensboro massacre, we were still facing a lot of the same obstacles that the folks faced in 1979. Nothing like what they faced at all, but we still had the police department and city acting in opposition to us. So we tried to plan a community dialogue towards the end of our work where we were going to collect community ideas for the recommendations. And the police department had gone to the church, it was Gethsemane Baptist Church, and had gone to the church and tried to convince them that it was going to be a dangerous event and that they shouldn't host us. And luckily they didn't do that. They didn't, but there was lots of ways that we were, there was a white supremacist website called Stormfront that had posted the names and addresses of the commissioners and the staff that, and said we should reconcile these people with the other end of our 12 gauge or something. I don't really know anything about guns, but I think that's what it said. And we reported that to the police, and they said, "Isn't this what you wanted?" Reconciliation or something. Or maybe that's what they said when we had somebody scary show up to an event at the library, and they said, "Isn't this what you wanted?" So I'm glad to hear it sounds like things have gotten better here, but this was still stuff that we were facing during the course of the work. I think I'm supposed to talk about the report release at this point. So we very much, the commissioners knew when they made their recommendations that they weren't just, it would do no good to just make them to city leaders or county leaders, because the real people who were going to carry on this work were the grassroots organizers. So even though they made their recommendations to the city and county leaders, the people poised to really make the changes, they also made secondary recommendations to the grassroots community. We collected report receivers, so groups and individuals who committed to taking these recommendations and agreeing to study the report and so forth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We also faced opposition, not opposition, but challenges with the media. The News and Record, at that point, they published a story. You saw, I don't know if it was in the video, Nelson's testimony. Some of his testimony was in there, but he painstakingly apologized for everything he could, possibly with integrity, apologized for in his report. He apologized for the language that he used, the dehumanizing language that he used to refer to the Klansmen and Nazis. He didn't apologize for anything he shouldn't apologize for. But the headline in the News and Record the next day said, I don't know if it was in the headline, but the article said there were no apologies given at the Truth Commission hearing yesterday. So they were, it was really very frustrating. The report release, the reporter writing about I could go on. I just want to give you a snippet of the opposition that we faced from the local paper of record. The reporter, Laura, you probably remember this. The reporter called me and asked me for information about how the report was going to be released to the community here at Bennett in the chapel. And she said, well, I said, well, the commissioners are going to be handing out copies of the report in the chapel. And she said, well, I don't understand. Explain it to me. And I was like, they're going to walk up and down the aisles and they're going to hand out the copies of the report. She said, I still don't understand. And I said, you know, like when people pass out communion, they're just going to walk up and down the aisles. She wrote the story and said the commission's executive director said the report will be released like communion. So anyway, we faced a lot of opposition like that. But we had one of my favorite stories about the report release ceremony. It actually started before that. When our researchers and we had an intern who was calling people early on who lived in Morningside when the massacre took place. And a lot of people did not want to talk to us. The fear that people who lived in Morningside had, the anger that people had towards the CWP, Workers' Viewpoint organization, was real. Still, I don't know to what degree it still is, but back then it was very, very real. So when we called this one woman and she yelled, she screamed. And this intern who called her assumed that she was angry like so many other people were. But she screamed from joy. Her name is Candy Clapp. She screamed from joy. She said, she told us, that was my 13th birthday. And she said she screamed because nobody had ever asked her, even though this was such an important, like life-changing moment for her, nobody had ever asked her how this experience had affected her. She said nobody at school talked about it, her parents didn't talk about it, nobody at church talked about it. It was just hush hush, they were under curfew, all these, but nobody talked to the children about what this meant. And it was very clear, no, she wasn't supposed to talk about it. So when we called and asked her how it had impacted her, this was the very first time. We invited her to come and speak at a public hearing. She was in the video. She was wearing a big hat because she's still scared to be in crowds, or at the time she was still scared to be in crowds. So she told us she wore that because we were at A&T for that hearing. We were down and the audience sort of sat up from you, and that made it so that she couldn't see anybody in the room. She actually showed up the day before when we were setting up for the hearing. She said, oh my gosh, I figured out I lied to you. She said, and you're a truth commission, and I lied. It was my 14th birthday, not my 13th birthday. She said, are you still gonna let me testify? I said, absolutely. But she came, and then she did a beautiful job. Then we invited her to speak at our report release ceremony. And she doesn't drive, and her mom doesn't drive, or didn't at the time. And so this intern went and picked her up. And she told me that on her way to the report release ceremony, her mom was telling her, I don't know why you're doing this, Candy. Nothing good can come of this. All this is going to do is going to bring trouble to your family and to you. And she spoke at the report release ceremony. She got a standing ovation. She did a beautiful job. And as the intern was driving her home, her mom said, I always knew this was a good idea. And I think her mom got involved with BCC for a while after that. She started going to HK-on-J marches and everything. So anyway, I just love that story. So I'd share it every chance I get. Did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to talk just one moment about the fact that although we had many opportunities to both speak with survivors of November 3rd, and most of them helped to promote the idea of Greensboro Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Upon the eve, basically, of the release of the report, I began to hear from people saying that they were really nervous about what the report would say about them, and actually asked if they could have just a moment before the report, could they hear what was going to be said. We actually had one survivor who decided not to come to the release because they were so afraid that they would once again be blamed for everything that happened. And later on, that person who actually did not live in North Carolina at the time, I had a chance to talk to him, and he said it was really a good report. He said, I was really very surprised and pleased and realized that my fears just got the better of me. But it's just another example of just how momentous this whole thing was for so many people, and that for someone like this person who was a survivor, it was 28 years in the making, and it still was very raw.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that we had all these report receivers who agreed to take the report to study it, and lots of groups did that. Not as many as we wanted to, but lots of groups did it. At the time, I thought this was going to happen over the course of 2 years, and then, you know, the recommendations would get implemented and we would be done. Obviously, that's not what happened, but Sherry is here. She and Spoma Jovanovic had several and other people had several classes that did this work. But we have asked, since we have the beauty of hindsight, we have, you can see up here some of the outcomes in Greensboro that have come to pass. Remarkably, about 15 years ago, somebody wrote a story in Mother Jones criticizing truth commissions, saying that it was just a way for transitional justice experts to make money. And maybe there's some truth to that, but here in Greensboro, they said there's no outcomes have ever come out of truth and reconciliation processes. So I wrote a rebuttal to that probably nobody read, but I was proud when I started looking at all the outcomes that actually have happened in Greensboro. So this is what it looked like about 15 years ago, a few years ago. But we are very lucky today to have Councilwoman Thurm, who can speak to the process that the City Council went through to finally come up with a meaningful apology. And then also to Paula Washington, who can talk about the scholarships that the city has implemented and the academy, and to a recent award that was created in Nelson Johnson's name. So Councilwoman Thurm, can you speak about that a little bit?
Thank you so much. You know, it's very interesting for me to hear the history and the background of the commission. Let me start by saying that back in '79 and '80, I worked for a law firm that was appointed to defend one of the Klansmen. And I got very involved in working on that defense as an employee of that firm. And y'all were telling funny stories. One of my ahas, because I was, 21 years old, is all the defendants came to our office for a meeting, and I was serving them coffee and bent down to serve them coffee and realized that I had my biggest Jewish star on. And I went into a little bit of panic because I thought, you know, I grew up north, I've never felt put on the spot of being in front of Klansmen before. And that was a growing up moment for me. And I'd had many conversations with the attorneys that I worked with about my personal conflict with the defense of these folks. And that was a personal reckoning for me. And I guess that's kind of come full circle when, as a council person, we were looking at appointing a subgroup of council to work and decide and make a recommendation in terms of an apology. And I felt it was my obligation, because I was so engrossed with the defense, to hear the whole story. We met with Reverend Nelson, and I believe Mr. Foxworth was there, and several others. And I made a commitment at that time to those individuals that I wanted to learn. I couldn't commit yet whether or not to do an apology and whether I could be for it and support it, but I made a commitment to really go through and understand what your work was and what you all produced. And that was very impactful, and it made the decision to support an apology very easy for me as a person. Many times when we sit on council, what we want to do as individuals has to be tempered with what's best for the city. And we have to look at things more holistically. There was no doubt in my mind what was best for the city, though that was not unanimous between all the council. Dr. Goldie Wells, Nancy Vaughn, and I met numerous times with marked up versions of your report and saying, well, do we owe an apology for this? And did we address this? And there were difficult conversations had, just like you all had difficult conversations. There were conversations for us about what is best for the community and what is the right thing to do. You know, years before, the marker that you saw on a prior slide had been erected. And with me being my Jewish faith, one of the things that as a Jew we do is we remember important incidences in our history every single year. There is a way to remember that. It's fine, and for me it was fine to have the marker, but I said, you know, years from now, I drive by markers all the time and I never read them. Or I go, oh yeah, that's where so-and-so was, but it really doesn't hit. And Pat talked about the burden that the children felt of carrying the history forward. And we talked about the fact that it really should be the city's burden to carry that forward. That part of the reconciliation process was to ensure that the city didn't forget that history and that the city remembered and that we remembered regularly, and as our youth were coming up, that they remembered. And that's why we decided to go with an annual scholarship program for students that were generally from the area that Morningside was at one time. And we instituted the annual scholarships. It's important to us. It was important, it still is important to council to recognize those scholarships publicly in front of the community, because that's a way for us to own the responsibility and to continue to own the responsibility all these years later. And I hope that the victims and their families and those that lived in the community know that it is important to the city of Greensboro that we recognize their place in our history and that we learn from their place in history and carry that forward. Those are committed funds in the budget. There's not much that a city council can commit a future council to in terms of funding. That's something that we have committed to be ongoing in the budget, $1,979, and there is one scholarship for each of the individuals that were killed on that day. And with that kind of sums up my experience on putting together the apology, and if you want to talk about how we go forward with those scholarships.
Sure thing. Hello, everybody. Paula Washington. I'm an outreach and education coordinator with Human Rights. And one of the things that we are most proud of as a department is that we are the stewards of the Morningside Award. I am actually relatively new to the city by way of some folks. You get to sit in rooms with people who are like, I've worked here for 20 years, 30 years. I have only been with the city for 3. Before that, I was a school teacher. And so one of the things that I love the most about the award is that it is not attached to a GPA. It is not attached to someone being committed to going to an institution of higher learning. It is solely based on how they see their impact across where they're going to be employed, what business they're going to start, what higher education or further education facility they choose to follow, and what that means for the protection and expansion of human rights or civil rights work. We try to be as inclusive in that process as possible. So this year, we actually, one of the 5 seats will be reserved for a student who is not set their sights on college. Typically, a lot of times, for those of us in education, we know you have students who are gung-ho. They are filling out every single award application, scholarship application. They have plans to attend the biggest name schools. And sometimes we do have students who have very big hearts and expensive minds, but they are not trying to stay connected to school any longer than they have to. So this year we have worked with Dudley leadership to make sure that those students who want to be entrepreneurs, those who are going into dedicated employment programs and lanes, that they have a seat within that 5. We also have put in for an increase. As we know, the world is getting more expensive, and so while $1,979 is great, we also know that when we look at the cost of books or even the price of towels or fees to set up your own business, that does indeed look a little different. And so we've put in so that the award will be $2,979 for those 5 recipients. One of the things we also start to see is how we get the feedback from those students. So every year we sort of kind of flip-flop between how they can apply. So one year it's an essay, one year it's more visual, submit a video, create a project that allows for learners of different backgrounds and experience to go ahead and put their voice and their ideas out into the process. When we started seeing these, the teacher in me would look at them like, ooh, it's a little rough sometimes. Because again, we want to hear from all voices. And so we pulled together a task force from different commissioners. For those that are not familiar, our office hosts the Human Rights Commission, the Commission on the Status of Women, the Ad Hoc Committee for African American Disparity, the International Advisory Committee, which is the only committee of its kind in the country where they get to vote who their leadership is across the Greensboro districts. And then we changed our transgender task force. We made it more expansive. So it is now the LGBTQ+ task force as of this year. And so we are very proud that we have residents across all 5 districts that get to represent for those marginalized or lesser heard groups. So we bring those commissioners in, we ask them to volunteer to review the student submissions, and then they select the 5 young people. We have a dedicated awards process and dinner that we do over at the Yvonne Johnson Event Center. So for those of us oriented with Greensboro, that's right down the street from what would have been the then standing Morningside community. And so we invite community and family and leadership in to celebrate those young people and to hear from them directly. Last year, we launched the Nelson Johnson Award, and that's to honor a local educator who is putting forth the extra effort to connect the academic understanding with human rights expansion. So as a former earth science teacher, I can tell you we had a lot of conversation about environmental racism and the impacts and the lasting legacy of discrimination when we look at our environments, right? It's a little bit more than just the phosphorus cycle. And so we know that other educators are doing the same. And so in the legacy that was teaching that rested with Reverend Johnson, we wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that for adults who are doing the work with these young people. And so in June, we will again honor a new batch of 5 young people. The only requirement is that they qualify for graduation from Dudley High School, as Dudley was the school that traditionally supported the Morningside community. And then for our educators, for right now, to meet capacity, we open that application up to all county principals that serve city of Greensboro schools. So right now, we open that up to middle and high school principals and assistant principals to nominate a teacher, and then those names in the process are also reviewed by the same mix of commissioners to select the Nelson Johnson winner for each year. I would like to say I'm a year younger than the massacre. My parents moved to Greensboro when I was a little bitty baby, so Greensboro is home. And the full circle moment is that I danced with the Johnson daughters growing up, right? And so I knew them as, Miss Johnson, so costumes when they would all get together. And Reverend Nelson was always sort of kind of hanging around, telling us not to run through the hallways of the Coliseum during recital. And so to be able to honor the work and to get the story out has been very important to me as an individual, but our office, again, holds it in much higher regard. We have made sure that our students, as we thought about what to get them, that we started the Morningside Academy. And with that, we now work with students at Dudley across the whole academic year. And we started last year with a cohort. Again, the teacher in me was like, they need a little bit more. And so we started with a cohort last year of 11 students. This year we have grown to 37. We have grades 9 through 12. We meet with them across 3 learning retreats where we bring forward human rights programming pillars. So we look at wicked problem framework. We look at using the VUCA analysis as a tool to assess resolution. We want to make sure they understand that wicked problems have no one solution and that there are no one particular group of folks. There's multiple stakeholders, and that we want to make sure they understand how one decision over here ramifies or ripples through a community. And so we work with them. They are challenged to complete smaller activities such as a Human Rights Day poster. We put that out, and city employees get to vote on that. They get to attend some of our human rights events either as participants and or volunteers, so they can start to see the interconnectedness of this work, and that we can challenge them to see it outside of lived experience. Oftentimes, a lot of us have a place that's important to us, and we're like, human rights is this, civil rights is this, I need this voice heard. But we want to make sure they understand that they are all connected and that we have to look out for everybody, and what is important for us could very well be very important for someone else, and that we need to all work to advocate to expand that. And so with the Academy, we move them around, we get them in front of city leadership, and we make sure they get the full story. We were very lucky last year. The Morningside book by Mr. Shetterly was coming out, so we were able to actually get students to the museum to hear him speak directly and to meet and talk with him. He even signed books for those that were able to attend. And so we just try to expand their worldview and what they understand human rights to be, and the challenge before us. And so they will be working on projects and present those out in April. So I hope that many of you will be able to join us and review their projects and give them feedback, because that will be very important as they move forward. We've been very lucky and blessed to have an amazing cohort of young people so far. And so here, as we look forward to what that means, we are really excited to see what they do and the work that they do. We do have a almost big sister or big cousin cohort at A&T, and so this year is the first year that our A&T cohort students and our high school Morningside Academy cohort students will actually get to meet and to share their ideas on how we solve these wicked problems. So again, from a department standpoint, we are incredibly, incredibly grateful to be trusted to be stewards of such work with young people.
Thank you.
Awesome. Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thank you so much for the work you're doing. That's really, Greensboro's come a long way. Does anybody have any questions for any of the panelists?
Hi. I was just curious. I saw like on that introductory video where they had the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in there. And was that at the Truth and Reconciliation Committee? And was he there as a hostile witness, or was he more conciliatory by that time?
You want to speak to that?
Yeah. Yes, he was still a very active member of the Klan. He was not conciliatory. But interestingly enough, he talked about the reason why he came was because he wanted to tell his truth. And I think that regardless of what you think about people's perspectives and so forth, in my mind, the fact that he came actually gave even more credibility to the commission itself, because we, as I said, we didn't have subpoena power or anything like that. But the fact that we could get people to come and actually talk and tell their stories, you know, it wasn't a story that we agreed with necessarily, but the fact that he was able to tell his truth, I think, actually gave some credibility to the overall process.
Great panel.
Thank you.
Jill, what is the status of the commission at this point?
So the commission finished its work in 2006, and then we didn't have a mandate anymore, so we dissolved. Yes, yes. So the work of implementing the recommendations went back to the community, and there were a lot of community members that worked on implementing them, but the beloved community center, I think, really had the heart and continued doing a lot of that work themselves. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I have a question around some of the outcomes that I think were presented. Greensboro's annual report on racial equity was on that list of outcomes. I don't know if that's a continual thing coming off of this gentleman's question, since the commission has been dissolved in 2006. We're 20 years later. Are we looking at, I wasn't able to find an annual report on racial equity, but I also wasn't able to find an annual report in the ad hoc committee on African American disparity. It's due to, if your agency is the one that's doing the annual report on racial equity and what that looks like, would be great. And if it mirrors the 2023 police community survey outcomes, to see if there's a correlation there and actually impact.
Sure. So we do produce an annual report, and so with that, our commission's annual information is housed within that one report. So our annual report for our office does come out under the Human Rights Department annual report. As far as racial equity, we did have a department that was listed as equity and inclusion. We have recently restructured where we are all together. So they previously handled the national as well as the citywide reporting for that. So that would be any of those reports need to go to the federal level by way of affirmative action, employment equity, and then they would also put out the citywide version of that under the Inclusion and Equity Department. We have not had a full annual report in the restructuring, and so this June, we will start that annual process as being a fully restructured department, to where now that's part of our lift as well, if that makes sense. Because before it sat with equity and inclusion, so we are now all together. Yeah.
It does, but the timeline, 20 years, I'm just wondering if there's any database to pull previous reports. If the council, if the city council have received any of these reports, where do they go to find these reports?
So, yeah, so the Human Rights Annual Report does live. So once that is published, we actually publish it, and it's also published digitally. Those then get dispersed. So they are moved up to leadership, and then they live, and so people can access those reports for the annual report. As far as the racial equity, because at first it did not sit with our department, that was a different department. That's why I'm saying, as far as our department, that will get rolled in with this newest run. And so with that, I do know the federal reports, that would be open for public requests, because again, those are federal reports that do have to get filed, and they are passed along to leadership. Actually, Dr. Jones, you want to come on up?
I can just answer.
Okay.
I project pretty well, so I'm sure you can hear me. So there are different versions of that very report. The one that Paula is referring to is a more simplified report that pertains to the data for the city of Greensboro. The report that you're referring to was a formal report that was done in partnership from a separate funding pot in the earlier 2000s. And so with the discontinuation of that funding, that's why there's a very large gap in the updating of that report, several $1,000s, and a lot of partnership from universities. And so even though there has been at times discussion about revitalizing that report, there's a funding source challenge, and so that's why you see that long gap as far as something that in theory would have been updated. I believe the last version of it preceded my tenure, and I've actually been with the city for 13 years. So that was a separate partnership, secondary to like the standard work of the Human Rights Department. There was a grant fund that supported that particular larger report that you're referring to. But there are subsets of race and equity data, but it exists with the city, mostly pertaining to city staff, and that was what was from a separate department. Hopefully that at least explains that gap in time. Okay, thank
you. Any other questions? All right, well, why don't we see if our panelists have any closing remarks? Oh, okay, got a hand.
Thank you all for your reflections. My question was about getting involved. So, Paula, you mentioned about evaluating student projects. How can we learn about that, get involved? What kind of evaluators are you looking for? Because I know that mentorship is important.
Absolutely. So we have several moments where we invite people in to learn about our commissioner process. Lucky for us, we have a mix of boards and commissions, meaning for instance, our ad hoc committee on African American disparity is just that it's a committee that you can volunteer to participate in. Again, with our International Advisory Committee, people can go out and set to run to participate in such. And so we do encourage people to come out. You can always check out our website. We're just Greensboro NC and then a little / human rights. And then we will also put out an invitation in our upcoming, we do a monthly newsletter. And so then we will definitely put that in our newsletter for people to come out to the event that evening in April. And again, it's almost, if you could think about it, almost like a science fair as far as they will get feedback from those in attendance, and then people will then vote and cast their vote for our awardees.
If I could just add, Greensboro City Council individuals are constantly looking for people that would like to volunteer on the boards and commissions that we have, be it the human rights, any of the various boards and commissions. I'd encourage folks, if they're interested in getting involved with the city in that regard, any of those regards, to go to the City of Greensboro website, look up search for boards and commissions. You'll get a whole list of all the boards and commissions. There's a very easy form to fill out. In addition to that, I'd encourage folks to reach out to their city council representative and find out what openings there are, because we almost always have openings on some of these boards and commissions.
Absolutely. The website that Councilwoman Thurm is referencing, it'll list the vacancies for the different boards and commissions, and it'll also give you background information on what those commissions are, because of course we just hold 5, but there's several that float throughout different departments across the city.
I'm curious about whether in these years, do businesses or individuals come to the city Human Relations Department with complaints about discrimination or lies, et cetera, needing reconciliation? Is that a service for individuals or businesses? Or do you have any indication that things have gotten better or worse over time with the number of complaints you get, if you have such data?
So our department, for those that are not quite familiar with us, we actually have a compliance department, or division rather, that handles fair housing complaint. That's our biggest pocket. We also handle public accommodations, so if people are denied access to a public facility based off of a protected class or status. We also handle language access and immigrant support for the city in that compliance piece. And then our division of belonging and engagement is where we get the support for the award and the events that we do. With that, we we definitely have conciliation processes that are set up based off of various federal and state guidelines for fair housing, for public accommodation. These also live within the city ordinance. However, people do call our office, and one of the things that we pride ourselves in is maintaining community relationships to get people the information that they need, or to get them to the right department or the right community resource. When it comes to conciliation for fair housing, for instance, we handle discrimination in that regard, and it does include race, disability, familial status, which means you have kids under 18 living with you, and we track that data. Last year, we were able to put we put a dollar amount. Last year, we were over $40,000 in funding to make wholeness for people as we look at how we conciliate across those avenues. When we start looking at public accommodations, unfortunately, we don't have legal teeth, if you will. In the ordinance, the business, if discrimination is found, there's a $500 fee for that organization that goes to support the school system. But we do have dedicated investigators that are tasked with following up on resident complaints. And so if discrimination is found, then we do move forward in processes for wholeness. We do support those that feel like something's not quite right when it comes to their housing, but it's not a full fair housing case. So we also have a free resident mediation program, or our landlord-tenant program, in partnership with UNCG. So we help mitigate discrimination, and keeping people housed is the main goal for that piece. And so we do a lot of conciliation work in that regard. Dr. Love Jones is in the back. She's our department director, so she can also speak again to work outside of my baby 3 years. But with that, we do make sure that we educate out about what we do. We advertise that people can report to us, that we are a safe reporting space, and we do share that information up with leadership. So we track, for instance, discrimination in housing by district. We do it by protected class, and we make sure that we keep that information flowing upwards to leadership so that they are aware of those pockets and work that still needs to be done.
I just realized I don't know who else in the room. Can you raise your hand if you're from Greensboro or live in Greensboro right now? Okay, look around so you all know who's in the room. Maybe everybody does know. Thank you. Raise your hand if you're from elsewhere in North Carolina. All right. Thank you. Raise your hand if you're not from North Carolina. I'm from North Carolina, but okay. All right. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to ask Pat to make her closing comments. And we're going to, just to bring us back to what we're here for, the panel's for, is thinking about moving towards a statewide Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I think that's what your comments are going to be about.
Okay.
Not to control you. You can say whatever you want to, actually.
Actually, first of all, I just want to thank Bridget and Beloved Community Center for putting on this whole event, and for inviting me to be a part of a panel. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, and most importantly to kind of ride the tail of the excitement of doing something even bigger here in North Carolina. Jill and I have both worked on other commissions, or in some were attempts to do other commissions, and one in Detroit totally imploded because it didn't really have the community behind it. Another in Maine did quite well, but I think that one of the things I find most exciting is just even like Jill's little survey of who's in the room, and the fact that there are so many people who are committing to a process beyond Greensboro. I think the Greensboro Truth and Reconciliation Commission was important for what it did in the moment, but probably more importantly, it's foundational for what can be and should be going forward. So I commend you for taking that on. And as we heard from the many snippets of video from Reverend Johnson, you know, what can be done here can be replicated in other places. And so it's not just Greensboro, it's not just North Carolina, but it's what can be done in other places. And to that, I'm most appreciative of the efforts that are going on.
All right. Do our other panelists have any comments for other communities, elected officials in other communities or human rights commissions thinking of engaging in this kind of work? It's okay if you don't, but you can take it first.
In terms of elected officials in other communities, I think we have to realize that it's not necessarily a popular thing to do, and you've got to have elected officials that have the integrity and the willingness and don't care, quite frankly, whether or not some of what they do is popular, but really care about what they do, whether what they do is right. And to try do this process with sub-elected officials that are going for that popularity award, it's tough to do that, and it's, you know, I think you may be better off to wait one cycle and see if you can get somebody committed to the process to run, quite honestly, because it takes a lot of commitment, and it takes a certain amount of bravery, I think, to step into these kinds of positions and these kinds of roles, and to make be willing to make these kinds of decisions, because sometimes there's a penalty to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, it's a completely different story than when I left Greensboro in 2006, I guess. It's very exciting.
I would like to recognize that, I don't know whether Councilman Irving Allen is still here. I can't see him from here, but Councilwoman Cece Crawford is here and has been here all day as part of this. And I just want to acknowledge that Cece's here, and she's another one of those folks that's been a great partner, and I know will be a great partner going forward.
Yep, thank you. How about you, Paula?
For our office, we are constantly looking at a couple of things. One is, how do we mitigate harm? And two, how do we then work for wholeness? I think that when we look at expanding human rights work, we try to make sure that we keep that in mind. We also try to make sure that our community partners and the folks coming to the table have a language for what is okay. Are you okay? How do we bring people in? How do we get at the root of what people need in seeking for that wholeness? And so for other human rights departments or human relation departments or committees, we just always try to build that communication bridge where we're always developing the language for how are you okay, what makes you okay, and to work for that wholeness for people.
Yeah, thank you. And I think for me, the biggest challenge in this process is going to be crafting a mandate and a research scope that's going to include as many people as possible, but is going to have research goals that are manageable. It's not going to scare off a commission. And I think related to that, it's managing the expectations. A truth commission is not a magical body that's going to do everything that you want it to do. It has to be, and you don't want to raise up people's expectations that it's going to do more than it can possibly do. And so you have to figure out what it can do and manage people's expectations. That's not what you want to hear, but I think if you acknowledge that it's a piece of a process, that the people still have the responsibility to carry it out, then that is going to get you far.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I think we also have to be realistic in that these things take time.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to get through the whole process and expect the people that were in office and in charge and that were responsible on the front side. It takes some time to get divorced from that.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of the slowness of once your report came in to the point that we could actually vote for an apology, is it takes time. And We don't like that fact, but it's just.
But it's real.
It's real.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Please give a big round of applause for our panel. Yes, thank you. Okay. So right now we're going to take a nice, well-deserved 15-minute break. So please get up, stretch, wiggle your toes, wiggle your ears, get you some water, and I think we still have some coffee left, so if you need an afternoon coffee, definitely grab that. When we come back in, we're gonna have a beautiful performer to come up and give you a little something to carry on for the rest of the day. So please enjoy your 15-minute break.